Got a new tool. Not the typical type of tool I use out in the shop, but I got a 3D scanner. Actually, this is a shared tool split between 4 of us to get the cost down. This is the Einstar 3D scanner by Shining 3D. This is not a sponsored video. This is something we went out, researched, and found what we thought was the best one available. I wanted to share my experience using the scanner and, at the end of the video, tell you if this is something I would recommend or not. Spoiler alert, if you need to scan some stuff in your garage or in any project you're doing, this thing's pretty great. The first thing I decided to scan was part of the Jeep project. This is the Dana 44 rear axle out of the Jeep. I thought it'd be a great idea to scan this thing and verify if the truss I designed actually fits. So I put up a little window of what the software shows you. I'm not going to go into detail on how the software works or anything, but you'll hear a few bleeps and bloops, and that corresponds to tracking. It's an audible warning to tell you that the scanner lost tracking. I'm watching the computer monitor as I scan this just to see and make sure everything's looking okay. So how this software tracks, it looks at what you're scanning, analyzes what you have scanned, and tries to align the new points to existing scanned features. So there's a ton of processing going on to try to keep everything aligned and everything accurate. There's a few ways the software scans or aligns. It aligns based on geometry, or it aligns based on colors or pattern or paint on the object you're scanning. I had this scan based on both. It's a hybrid approach, so it scans on texture and geometry. So the pumpkin of the axle has the most complex geometry, so it's really easily aligned on that. I did notice it had a hard time scanning interiors, like of the pumpkin there. One of the nice things is you can pause during scanning and then look at what you've scanned so far and make sure you're on the right track or it looks okay. So it's looking pretty good right now. This is a LiDAR based scanner, not laser or anything like that, so it picks up the texture or the paint of the object. And I just switched it there to a quality measurement. So this tells you if the points that it's captured are a good quality or not. Green is good, and as it gets more red, it's less quality data. So I was looking at this and messing with some of the editing. I'm going in and circling some of the points that I don't want. So you can lasso around them, select them, and delete them. Since this doesn't have any more complex tracking than trying to match existing geometry, you're going to end up with some of those weird artifacts off in the middle of nowhere. But I honestly didn't have much of a problem with them at all. You're going to need a pretty beefy computer to do this. Look at the website. It recommends the best hardware to use. The computer I'm scanning on here is an i9-9900 Intel, 32 gigs of RAM, and a 2080 Super video card. So it's a bit of a beast. No 13th generation, but being a 9th gen processor, it's a little older. This thing didn't tax it at all. I think RAM is the biggest limitation. Anything less than 16 gigs, I think you'd have a bad day. Those bleeps and bloops and tracking issues kind of get old pretty quick. This was an hour and 20 minute scan, and I managed to get through it without throwing the scanner across the room, so that was a plus. And of course, being a shared tool, I had to exercise a little more patience. I'd rather not pay for the whole thing. I had the axle housing rotating on one of the axles with the bearing still on it. It made scanning this larger object that much easier, but I still had to manhandle it and flip it around there. I'd paused the scan, so I hit resume. It takes quite a while to start resuming. And here's one of the big reasons it took me an hour and 20 minutes. You can see the pumpkin kind of flipping out on the screen right there. So this axle does have some rotational symmetry to it. The outer flanges are the same, and the shock mounts are actually the same. They're rotated across the pumpkin, which I didn't really realize, but they're not perfect. So I had to pause, and I noticed that, wait a minute, it was actually flipping around and overwriting what I had already scanned. So I had to be really careful and watch the screen and make sure this didn't happen. One thing I would really like to see in this software is an undo, but based on timeline, to where you could actually scroll back your scan time and erase points as you scanned them. That'd be really cool if it was a time-based undo feature. Got done with the scanning and started doing some post-processing. The software can take it and clean up your scan, get rid of some of those floaty points, and also close in the scan and get rid of holes, so it makes a watertight solid. If you've done any 3D printing or anything, you know what that means, and I won't explain it 100% in this video, but just think of it as when I'm done processing this will be one solid, one filled in object. You can see on the end there, it's not a hollow tube anymore. The software took it and closed it all off. You can see in the pumpkin especially, it's not accurate, and I didn't need that here in this scan. So I'm okay with how it came out. The outer shell is the most important thing that I needed from this scan, and I got that. The software will let you measure across different points too. I measured across the flanges and across a few other critical points here. And ultimately, the scan ended up being within 2 millimeters across the flange to flange dimension of this axle housing. That is pretty damn good, and honestly, really awesome. Like everything came in just fine. So I had already come in here and aligned everything to X, Y, and Z and into the UCS of Fusion 360. Again, since the scanner doesn't really have any good reference points, it's gonna kind of come in weird and rotate it in some random space. And here's what we were shooting for. So I brought in my truss design and laid it over the scan, and it looks like everything lines up pretty nice. This truss wasn't designed in Fusion 360. I'm gonna have to go through and learn Fusion 360 a little more and start doing some designs in it. But I got it close enough so we can actually see what's going on. Everything's in metric too. I prefer freedom units, so it's kind of a pain to work with. Truss fits exactly where it needs to. It fits between the perches of the spring mounts. I'll be cutting these existing mounts off and integrating them into the truss, and now I can be a lot more confident with designing that here. You can tell how conservative I was for cutting around the pumpkin. Again, I can take this and get this thing millimeters away and use as much material as possible. More material, more strength. Checking some vertical alignment here. I'm also noticing here I really want to shrink down the overall height of the truss so I don't have any body clearance issues. But yeah, I can really take this and shrink it into the pumpkin and also weld to the pumpkin too. The stupid shock mounts too. I'm gonna take those and cut those off and integrate them into the truss. A little more clearance there, less things to hang up on. Overall, this scanner is awesome. This was a great first scan. This allows me to utilize the steel that I was going to cut out anyway, while adding more strength to this truss design. The price is high. It's $1,000. That's why we decided to split it among 4 people. So it was about $250 each, and at that price, that's a little more reasonable for me to have kicking around the shop. I can't wait to start scanning more things and figuring out more projects that this fits in. This will save me time in my CAD design and my workflow, and ultimately lead to better designs. Wrapping this up, go ahead and like and subscribe and follow along. I'll figure out a few more projects to use this on. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.